Hello, good morning. This is Dr. Iftikhar Ansari, Department of Political Science, Aligarh Muslim University, AMU. Friends, today I'll be talking about the unitary form of government, and this is my second lecture, which is going to be in a continuation of what I have already spoken about the unitary form of government in my previous video. Now, unitary form of government, as we have seen in my previous video, that it was a government where the central government holds all the power and the states, they get their power through the center in the form of devolution or in the form of administrative convenience. And these powers, which are so devolved, can be taken back anytime or can be expanded. So we were talking about different kinds of features or important features of a unitary form of government, and in that we saw that number of features including a single citizenship or importance of having a unified judiciary or the power of center is overpowering over the peripheries or the states or some of the main characteristics. Now, continuing with that same features, we also find that in a unitary form of government, there is especially a provision of national emergency. Now, the proclamation of national emergency reduces even a federal kind of a setup to a central one. So, when national emergency is declared, the union or central government, it becomes all powerful and the state governments come under the total control of it. Now, the state governments, they lose their autonomy altogether. Now, during times of emergency, governments have the power to implement policies that they wouldn't normally be able to. Now, this is done to ensure the safety of the people and protection of their interests. Now, the states of emergency can be declared in various situations such as natural disaster, civil unrest, armed conflict, or medical pandemic or other biosecurity risks. In democracies, states of emergency are used to manage extreme weather events or public order situation. However, dictatorial regimes often use the states of emergency to override human rights or to bring into force a martial law or declaring some kind of authority that can override the liberties and fundamental rights of the people. Now, the state of emergency in India is allowed under Article 352, 356 and 360, through which the Indian Constitution allows the executive to declare emergency to protect the interest, whether the constitutional mechanism through Article 356 or financial emergency through Article 360 or any kind of external aggression through Article 352. So the President of India, upon the advice of the Cabinet of Ministers, can overrule many provisions of the Constitution, including fundamental rights and devolution of powers to the state. And this is one feature of central power holding agency in a unitary form of government, which makes the center even more powerful. And in a federal setup where there is a division of power, there as well, the center has a tendency to become all powerful in the situation of national emergency. Now, some of the other features which can be an indicative of having a unitary form within a federal form or a unitary form completely are that in especially which we talk about in Indian context, we find that the appointment of the governor from the center to the states, which is provided in Article 200, this governor, it is basically central nominee and who acts as an agent of the center in the states. And so Article 200, 201, they provide for the reservation of bill by the governor for the consideration of the president of the union. So that is one provision or one feature which makes even the federal setup that we claim to have in India turning into or biasness, having a biasness towards the unitary one where the governor is appointed in a state and who acts as an agent of the state. Secondly, there is also a single election commissioner that conducts elections at both the center and the state. Now, election commission envisaged in Article 324, whose members are appointed by the president. They will superintend, they will direct and control elections not only to parliament but also to the state legislature. that feature also indicates towards a unitary character, or which is found in a country having a unitary form of government. Then Article 169(1) authorizes the Parliament to abolish the Legislative Council of a state, or to create such a body where it does not exist on a resolution of the Legislative Assembly of a state. And that Article 172 authorizes the Parliament to change the composition of a Legislative Council of a state. Now, these two provisions, especially the dissolution or abolition of Legislative Council altogether, or changing the composition of the Legislative Council, that is the upper house in states, is an indication of, or it's one of the features of a unitary form of government. Moreover, the representativeness of those states of Council of States which have no assemblies are chosen in such manner as the Parliament may provide. So even the representatives chosen in that upper house is also the prerogative of the center. Now, such features give an indication of a unitary form. Then the division of power which is made between the center or the subjects on which they can make a rule through the different subjects which are in constitution assigned to center state, and there is also provision of residual power. Now, this residual power of legislation rests with the Parliament in Indian case, and not the legislatures of the states as it is the case in America. So it is in contrast to the powers of the states in federal countries like America and Australia. Further, Article 368 provides that if constitutional amendments dealing with some specific matter is passed by each House of Parliament by a majority of its total membership and by not less than 2/3 of the members present at voting, it shall be presented to the President for signature, and the consent of the state is not needed at all. So that provision or that feature again indicates towards a unitary character of Indian constitution or Indian government, and it is one of the features of a central kind of unitary government. Then the provision of having a controller and auditor general appointed by the President under Article 148, it further makes the country unitary in character when it appoints a single individual to have a watch not only over the finances of the union but also of the state. Then the states are given representation in the upper house on the basis of population, not on the equality basis. So when that equality basis is not taken into consideration, that shows that the upper house, which should have been given equality of status through the equal representation, is given representation on the basis of the population of that country. So in United States, on the other hand, we find this principle of equality of representation of states in upper house is fully recognized, and thus the American Senate has 100 members, 2 from each state. Now, this principle is regarded as a safeguard for smaller states. Now, we also have a provision in India of all India services. Now, in United States, the federal government and the state governments, they have their separate public services. In India also, the center and the states have their separate public services, but in addition, there are all India services like IS, IPS and IFS, now which are common to both the center and the states. Now, the members of these services are recruited and trained by the center, which also possess ultimate control over them. Thus, these services violate the principle of federalism under the Constitution and gives it a unitary form of government's character. Now, moving on to the merits of unitary government, we find that the unitary type of government represents the most effective type of governmental organization. The whole problem of organization of a government is enormously simplified, and the system possesses the merits of flexibility. Now, one of the essential features of a good governmental system should be its ability to modify and adjust its organization and the manner in which its powers are exercised as new needs and conditions demand such a change. Now, in a unitary government, territorial division of the power is a matter for the government itself to determine. So it has accordingly full power to modify its scheme of internal organization and distribution of power as and when such need arises. So such a government which has the facility of modifying as per the changing situation, that simply the government is going to be an effective government, and this unitary form of government has the tendency to adopt and adapt to the changing situation. Then second merit of unitary form is that of its unity, and that outstanding feature of this unitary government. And the word itself indicates the unity of the country. So all powers of government are concentrated in the hands of a single set of authorities, and all organs of government, they constitute integral part of one piece of administrative mechanism. So there is uniformity of laws, uniformity in policies, uniformity in administration. So all the organs of government can thus be brought to bear directly upon the problems of administration to be solved. So there can be no conflict of authority, no conflict or no confusion regarding the responsibility for work to be performed. So no overlapping of jurisdiction, no duplication of work, plan or organization which cannot be immediately adjusted. So everything can be expedited in a very unified manner, and that is the hallmark of an administration which keeps on working, uniting, or avoiding all such conflicts which can bar or which can bring a hurdle into its efficient functioning. Then another feature, another merit of this unitary government is its promptness. So in the field of especially foreign policy and in the field of national defense, the strength of this central or centralized government is especially manifested. It exhibits a promptness of decision, and it also exhibits a firmness of action, a unified administration. It checks all centrifugal forces and saves the administration from disruption. So the focus of loyalty is not divided. It concentrates at one single point, and it thus injects a sense of single patriotism and vouches for the unity and integrity of the state. Now finally, a unitary government, being simple in organization, is less expensive. There is no duplication of political institution, and that is the next merit of this system, which is very cost effective and cost efficient. So unitary government is cheaper to run because there are fewer levels of bureaucracy and fewer wages to be paid, resulting in the lower operational costs. It also promotes a sense of unity because loyalties are not divided, and it reduces polarity within society. So additionally, a unitary system is cheaper to run because there are fewer levels of bureaucracy, which means lower operational costs, and further, a unified and unitary government can be smaller and more efficient since it can run from a single location with minimum elected officials and representatives. So unitary system of government is a centralized form of government where most, if not all, powers rest with a single government entity. Now this system allows for quick decision making, lower operational cost, a sense of unity. However, it does not provide the same level of autonomy to subnational governments as a federal system does. So in a federal system, power is divided between the central authority and the constituent political units, allowing for local autonomy while ensuring national unity. And federal system often have a written constitution and a two-chambered legislature and an independent judiciary, whereas the central government or central government in a federal system is usually more powerful than the state governments and has more resources to enforce its laws and policies. Now, moving on to the defects of this unitary form of government, we find that one major defect which can be ascribed to this form of government is that it tends to repress the local initiative. It discourages rather than stimulates interest in public affairs. It impairs the vitality of the local governments and facilitates the development of centralized bureaucracy. So the present day central government, it is maintained, have to tackle so many complex problems which are national and international, that not a time is spared or devoted to local affairs. So local areas cannot accordingly progress. But such a criticism will not hold valid once we distinguish between centralization of authority and centralization of use of this authority. So unitary government are often seen as more efficient and less expensive than the federal system. Now this is because there is no need to divide power and resources between different levels of government. However, this unitary government, it lacks local autonomy, which means that decisions made at the central level may not always reflect the needs and desires of local communities. Additionally, unitary government may not be well suited to large and diverse countries where different regions may have different needs and priorities, and different communities are staying at different regions. So finally, unitary government may not provide citizens with as much political education as decision making is concentrated at the central level. So in some unitary governments, there may be a process of deconcentration and decentralization. So deconcentration involves shifting the administration of certain affairs from the central government to the representatives and agents in local areas. Now, this helps to relieve the congestion at the central level and allows for more efficient administration. However, even in these cases, the central government still maintains control and direction over these local officials and agents. And decentralization, on the other hand, involves granting a limited degree of local self-government, such as the establishment of popularly elected councils. Now, this allows for some local decision making, but the ultimate authority and control still rests with the central government. Now, the really centralized government is one in which the central government, instead of making use of agencies which large powers of discretion are granted, attempts itself directly to administer local affairs. Now, that centralized tendency is one of the drawbacks or one of the demerits of this unitary form of government. Now, in this sense, France, in comparison with other countries, has a highly centralized government, and not because of it has adopted a unitary form of government. So, there is nothing in the unitary form of government which does not permit decentralization in the actual exercise of governmental powers or the conferring of authority or power to self-government upon political subdivisions. At the same time, unitary government is best suited for the small countries which have a geographical unity and which are radically and culturally homogeneous. So it does not suit a country with a large territory and huge population consisting of diverse races and culture as India and United States of America. Only a federation can bring unity out of this, and centralization is something which is going to stifle the desires and aspirations of these communities. Then one of the drawback of this unitary system is the financial dependence of the states upon the center. So in a federal structure, the states must be financially independent so that they have the utmost autonomy. Now in India, however, the states depend on the center for their funds and all development. So states in India have few revenue avenues but have immense expenditure requirements. Now this creates a financial dependence on the center. So the financial relation between the center and the state are such that the latter is often dependent on the former, that is, the states are dependent on the center. So as the constitution has not made any specific distinction, the country's financial resources are mostly under the control of the center. The state governments often do have with scant resources, due to which they often have to ask the center for grants and subsidies. Now this has historical roots as well, that Indian Federation was not formed by a voluntary agreement of independent states that kept the subjects that they preferred to themselves and handed over the rest to the center. In fact, in India, till 1935, the governance was centralized, and this led to the current state of federal structure. Then, on the aspect of accountability, again we find another demerit of the unitary form, that is, the concentrated power at the central level can lead to reduced accountability as decision making becomes more distant from the local communities. Now, this can impact the responsiveness of government and its governance itself, and the ability to address the needs and concerns of the people. Whether it is in the context of federalism in the United States, or global environmental governance, or states in Indian context, the concentration of power can have consequences for accountability and sustainability. It is important to consider the goals of those in power and to ensure that accountability mechanisms are aligned with the needs and priorities of the people they are meant to serve. Then there is also one of the defects of a unitary system is that of a political tension that it gives rise to because of that centralizing tendency. The use of unitary features such as the president rule, especially the Article 356, which is used in India, can lead to political tension and accusation of misuse by central government to undermine the state governments. Article 356 of the Indian Constitution, also known as the President's Rule, allows a union government to make and take control of the state government if it is unable to function according to constitutional provisions. Now, this means that the state government is suspended and the union government steps in to run the state. Now, during President's Rule, the Council of Ministers is dissolved and the Chief Minister is removed from the office. Additionally, the state's legislative assembly is either prorogued or dissolved, leading to a new election. Now, President's Rule has been a subject of debate and criticism. Now, some argue that it can undermine the federal structure of the country. The provision was inspired by Article 93 of the Government of India Act 1935, which allowed the British authorities to exercise ultimate power over provincial governments. And this has really caused heartburns among the state governments, especially when it has a government of a different political party than the one which is ruling in the center. Then another demerit is that the harmony in the society is sacrificed by having a kind of centralized and unified kind of unitary government. Now, striking the right balance between the unitary and federal principle is a challenge, and the overemphasis on unitary features could erode the spirit of federalism in a country, and that causes conflict between the central and state governments. So the conflicts between the central and state governments can arise when the central government attempts to impose its will on the states, now disregarding the unique circumstances and needs, and this can manifest in various ways, such as federal laws that override state laws, or unfunded mandate that place financial burdens on the state, or withholding of federal funds as a means of control. Now, these actions can breed resentment and erode the trust between the central and state governments, ultimately leading to the conflict and legal battles. So, when the unitary features of a government are overemphasized, it can undermine the essence of federalism and lead to tensions and conflict between the center and state governments. Then the state autonomy as well suffers. So while unitary features empower the central government, they can undermine the autonomy of states altogether. States may feel their decision-making power is limited, affecting their ability to address local issues effectively. In a unitary government and unitary system of government, the central government holds all the power and is the highest authority. This means the central government can create or get rid of smaller divisions within the country, and these divisions only have the powers that the central government allows them to have. While some unitary states may delegate power to the regional or local governments, the central government can still override their decisions or limit their powers. Now, this system of government originated in France after the 100 Years' War and spread throughout Europe and world through French conquests and colonization. Now, in contrast to this unitary states and federal countries are the countries where power is shared between the central government and the regional or local governments. So in federations, the regional governments have their own powers and cannot be unilaterally changed by the central government. However, in unitary states, there may be no area with a degree of autonomy, meaning that sub-national regions cannot make their own laws. Examples of unitary states without area of autonomy include earlier it was the Ireland, Norway, and Romania. Now, finally, coming to the conclusion part, we see that unitary states are different from federations, where power is shared between the central government and the regional or local governments. In federations, the subnational units have their own powers and existence that cannot be unilaterally changed by the central government. Now, in contrast, in unitary states, we have no areas with a degree of autonomy, meaning that subnational regions cannot make their own laws. So many countries around the world have a unitary system of government, and in fact, large majority of countries, 166 out of 193, have a unitary system. Examples of unitary systems include Japan, France, and United Kingdom. So in Japan, we find the central government in Tokyo has the authority to legislate on all policy areas, ensuring consistency throughout the country. And in United Kingdom as well, there is a strong central government, but local governments also have some power and responsibilities. Now, such unitary states, they have been handling the local government, with some having many smaller governments stationed around the country, and others have a very strong central government. So finally, what we find in a unitary system of government, that there is a type of government where all political power resides with a single central government. This central government can delegate powers to subnational units, but it ultimately has the authority to override their decisions. So unitary states are different from federations, where power is shared between the central government and regional or local governments. Many countries around the world have a unitary system of government, and each unitary state has its own way of handling the local government. Now, finally, coming to the end, what we can say is the unitary form of government is the one where center is all powerful, it's omnipotent, and all powers are drawn by the states from the center, and all are the creatures of that parliament or the center, which is the center of all the powers. So with that, I come to the end of my presentation for today. Thank you.